We're nearing the end of the year. As such, I feel it's time to do a final list of the best free-to-play MMORPGs of 2019 going into 2020. There's no doubt in my mind that the vast majority of you will have either played through at one point or at the very least have heard of most of these titles, but I implore you to nevertheless give these games a chance. Or give the players that haven't tried these games out yet the opportunity to see whether or not the games are worth playing in their opinion. Repeatedly spamming "that game sucks" and being toxic in the comments only discourages potential players from playing anything, and that is part of why the MMO scene is drying up. Most of the communities left are so toxic that they drive people away. So instead, and I know that this is going to be difficult for some of you, but let's just take a moment here and encourage one another to find something that looks fun to them and subsequently try it out. Note that these, of course, will be free-to-play MMORPGs only. Therefore, there will not be any pay-to-play games like Final Fantasy XIV or buy-to-play games like The Elder Scrolls Online included. With that said and done, let's see if we can't all find something fun to waste some time in then, yeah? I had to start this off with Phantasy Star Online 2. I just had to. Not only is it densely populated within Japan, but there are a plethora of Western players that play the game via a nifty little English fan translation project. While it hasn't released in North America or Europe yet, it is scheduled to release during spring 2020, which means that it's right around the corner. PSO2 is probably the ultimate MMO for fans obsessed with the anime genre. Not only is it probably one of the most accurate anime MMORPGs available right now, but it also has crossovers with literally every popular anime and JRPG. It's actually kind of crazy how large this game is, how much of an impact it's actually had on the market. While it does look great graphically, the action combat in-game is generally considered to be some of the best in the genre. I know that some of you guys will argue that BDO or Blade and Soul or maybe even Guild Wars 2 is better combat, and that very well might hold true to some people, but to others, people that enjoy PSO2 feel that it excels in combat. The game still has a very large, very active player base, and that will likely increase quite significantly when it finally launches in North America. I was always a fan of KRITIKA. Wiggy and I used to play it back when it was only released in Thai, or at least I think it was released in Thai. Playpark was Thai, I think, right? Yeah. Regardless, MMO Byte was pretty much one of the only channels to play KRITIKA before En Masse released the game in the West, although it didn't end up doing too well because of mismanagement of the game and it subsequently shut down. As of this week, All-M, the original developer of the game, re-released the game under their own management, and it soared to tens of thousands of players. I am personally pleased with that outcome, as I enjoyed the game quite a bit and was saddened to hear about its closure. While graphically it definitely looks a little more its age, I guess, its action combat is definitely top tier for a hub-based MMO. It definitely gets a little repetitive, as most games of its type do, but if this is a genre you're interested in, this is something you cannot pass up. The player base right now has tens of thousands of active players. Now is definitely an ideal time to jump in game and try the game out if you haven't already. Or alternatively, you could wait until I do my video on it sometime in the very near future and make up your judgment based off of that. I grew up with Neverwinter Nights as a kid. I am I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but I actually had a slight game crush on Erebeth. Was that just me? I can't honestly be the only one to have had a crush on her, right? Come on. Either way, I was ecstatic to play Neverwinter when I found out about it because it was supposedly set in the same world. And while Neverwinter is completely disconnected from the Neverwinter Nights games, or at the very least as far as I'm aware it is, the game stands on its own merits. Neverwinter is a good looking game. It has some really detailed, really epic looking environment and has a lot of depth to its world. Yes, it's published quite poorly, I might add, by Perfect World Entertainment, but if you ignore that aspect and the pay-to-win concerns a publisher brings with their games, Neverwinter is a very high-quality title. It has fantastic action combat, a lot of character customization, and to date receives plenty of regular updates. I honestly never really made it to endgame, as I've never had enough time to invest that deeply into the game, but I have a good friend that plays Neverwinter quite thoroughly called Nova. If you're interested in seeing what the game is really like, I would suggest hitting his channel up. I'll include a link to his channel in the description down below. The game is still fairly populated with tens of thousands of active players. Like PSO2, Ascent Infinite Realm has yet to reach our shores, but it has been all but confirmed at this juncture to be releasing in 2020. Well, the beta, anyway. I did a video on this in more detail a couple weeks ago, so if you're interested in specifics, just go ahead and check that out. I feel like this is the first game in this list to not have action combat, much to the surprise of many players, especially given that it's developed by the very same people that developed Terra. While it doesn't have action combat, it does make use of free aim tab targeting, meaning that you're required to have a target to attack, but it gives you much more freedom than traditional tab target games do. Since the game is releasing next year, you can bet that the game looks damn good. It does, it really does. I love steampunk games, and I think that the last steampunk MMO was Black Gold Online? Yeah, it was definitely Black Gold Online, and that game, man, that game sucked. So you can imagine my excitement for Air. It's impossible to really gauge interest and therefore speculate on the future potential player base number, but there is a lot of people interested in the game, and the beta tests for both the Korean and Thai versions of the game were packed with players. I had to include Flife. It is one of the OG anime MMOs that has somehow stood the test of time, with much of its competition having long since closed down. I played Flife as a teenager. It was one of the first MMOs I'd ever tried. If you have ever played Flife, you'll know how terrible that grind was in game and how long it took to level. But man, flying around on a broomstick for the first time was a magical experience. Excuse the pun. Flife is a very old MMO, probably one of the older ones in this list, but nevertheless, it still continues to offer a traditional MMO experience to players that you just don't find anymore. And that, I believe, is part of the reason it survived. It has tab target combat, has large open areas to explore, tons of classes to pursue, and takes a long time to progress through. It is not for those of you with no time to play a game, that is for sure. The player base is still going strong with thousands of players playing, and thousands of players split between various private servers as well. Honestly, if I had the time to invest hours every day into an MMO again, and I had an itch for an anime title, this would probably be where I'd end up. Before Black Desert became known as the MMO with the best action combat, Continent of the Ninth was one of the few MMOs to hold that title. Whether you loved or hated C9, the fact remained that the game had some great quality action combat. Even in 2019, people play and enjoy Continent of the Ninth despite its lower player base. While the game doesn't offer open world zones to explore or provide a large amount of player customization like PSO2, the game has managed to survive all these years. That's because at its core, it is a very entertaining game. Like Soul Worker or KRITIKA, Continent of the Ninth is a hub-based action MMO, meaning that you queue for a zone, you enter, and then you complete the mission that you have that required you enter. There honestly aren't many games like this left because they rapidly become redundant, but C9 has maintained player interest for years. While the graphics definitely show their age, the player base is stuck by and will likely stick by this game for a long time to come. I played the Secret World back when it required you to actually pay for it. It wasn't until it relaunched under the free-to-play Secret World Legends that it really caught my interest though. Not because it was a bad game, but just because I couldn't afford active subs to multiple MMOs at a given time. Secret World Legends is probably one of the better MMOs that I've had the pleasure of playing through though. Not only does it have a deep, well-developed story, but it has some ridiculously good voice acting, great graphics, and a great tab target combat system. Yes, it utilizes tab target, but it's more free aim tab target, allowing you to select your target but freely move your camera how you want. Unlike most MMOs though, Secret World Legends is set in the real world, aka our world. Real people, real areas, real environments, and real world problems. That is probably one of the key selling points to me, the fact that it's in a setting that is so often overlooked. The player base isn't nearly as high as it once was, with a few thousand active players on average playing. I'm actually in the process of recording Tree of Savior Rebuild right now, coincidentally, and I am almost level 100 after a couple weeks of playing. Honestly, the last time that I played a game like this was back when I played Ragnarok Online, which I know Tree of Savior is supposedly the spiritual successor to, but Tree of Savior is more than that. I know it made a lot of mistakes when it was young, but its beautiful graphical style, its impressive action combat, its class diversity, it truly offers players something else. You might have overlooked it due to issues before it was overhauled, you might have overlooked it due to the fact that it looks like an isometric action RPG, but if you haven't tried it yet, I urge you to give it a go. I will have a full, much more detailed video of it up in the near future, but I can tell you, it is a lot of fun. Plenty of people still enjoy it, with tens of thousands of players still logging in weekly to play it. I couldn't list free-to-play MMOs and not include Vindictus. Even with Black Desert available, people claim Vindictus still has better action combat than any other title on the market right now. And honestly, they're not entirely wrong. Vindictus has incredible combat and incredible visuals, and Nexon knows this, thus they continue to release new characters that cater to a certain demographic to keep players interested. And it works! Don't get me wrong, it really does! I've poured probably 20, maybe 30 hours or more into Vindictus, and the game is truly a marvel to play through. Granted, the earlier zones are somewhat uninspired, but then that's a reoccurring theme for a lot of MMOs. Vindictus is the only other hub-based MMO in this list, and that's because there really aren't many players interested in them. The few that do excel because they're good. And yes, although Nexon is a terrible publisher, Vindictus as a base game is a lot of fun. The player base still has thousands of active players as well, so there's no shortage of players to play with. No best free-to-play MMORPG list is complete without the inclusion of Mabinogi. It was one of the best anime MMO when it originally released, and it's still one of the best anime MMO over a decade later. I've only ever played Mabinogi as a traditional MMORPG. It definitely allows you to, however, it's also generally referred to as a social MMO or real-life simulator, as you're capable of doing much more than just leveling, grinding for gear, and exploring. While some MMOs like Black Desert or Final Fantasy XIV provide a lot in the way of additional content like crafting or life skilling or sailing, farming, and the like, Mabinogi expands even further. Now, to fully understand what that means, you're probably going to have to go ahead and read up on it because it is a lot to take in. It's a very unique looking game, almost one of a kind in the MMO scene. It also has very interesting combat, it's tab target, but I mean, it's like a constant game of rock, paper, scissors, I guess. The player base, however, has grown quite stagnant, but I'm sure they'd appreciate the new blood. You didn't think I'd forgotten about Guild Wars 2, did you? Definitely not. Guild Wars 2 has held, and likely will hold for the foreseeable future, the title of best free-to-play MMORPG, with the only competition probably being RuneScape, but there's more on that later. The reason Guild Wars 2 is held in such high regard is because the game has a very deep, rich story filled with content that definitely pulls on your heartstrings. It has action combat that, in my opinion, is some of the best in an MMO, allowing you to swap weapon types out and gain access to entirely new skill trees. There's a large world to explore that sinks players down to the level of the area you're in, providing players the opportunity to play with one another, and honestly, it just does so many things right. The only issues are that content releases are kinda slow these days, and that is having a noticeable effect on the player base numbers, and expansions, which are required to access later game content, are locked behind purchases. I'm actually in the process of recording a video on Guild Wars 2 right now, so if you're interested in more info on Guild Wars 2, you might want to keep your eyes peeled for that. I have repeatedly missed Star Trek Online in almost every single top list I have ever done because I just never got all that far through it. I've heard absolutely fantastic things about the game though, that it's packed with story content, that it has a lot of freedom, and is generally everything you'd want out of a sci-fi MMO. I know that it has pretty traditional tab target combat from what I experienced, but much in the Star Trek way, I guess, similarly to how Star Wars The Old Republic has traditional tab target combat, but in a Star Wars-y way. Yeah, that's pretty much the only way I could really go about explaining these. The player base is still pretty good, with thousands of people playing every day. Obviously, no free-to-play list would be complete without RuneScape. It does have, what, roughly 100,000 players online right now? Yeah, easily the most densely populated free-to-play MMO. And it stands to reason as to why. The game is packed with content, literal decades worth of content split between RuneScape and old school RuneScape. The game is an absurdly large world for players to explore and a plethora of content to both engage in and with. Combat is, and don't hate me for saying this, but honestly, it's a little dated. That should be obvious though and expected considering when the game was released. Even still though, it holds up pretty well. I'm just saying. Again, there are an absolute ton of players playing RuneScape. It also has cross-platform compatibility, so if you want to play on your mobile device, you can go ahead and boot that up. I've poured a solid 10, maybe 15 hours in Atlantica Online over the years. Yes, I've never really progressed nearly as far as I could have, but that's because it has a fairly small population. However, it's also one of the most unique MMOs I have ever seen. It plays much like an older MMO would, but provides a unique combat experience that I haven't seen replicated anywhere else. Well, not in a PC MMO anyway. See, Atlantica's combat takes place much in the same way that older JRPGs did. Whenever you would engage in combat, it would trigger an encounter that takes place in a separate loading screen. There you'd do battle in turn-based combat with a group of units trying to eliminate the enemy units. So combat and engaging enemies actually happens in an instanced battle. Yep. Graphically, the game still holds up very well, but the main selling point for the game is its unique combat. The player base is very low though. I'm not really sure exactly how low, but I wouldn't expect more than a couple hundred people really play this regularly. The final MMO in this list is GRANADO ESPADA. Much like Atlantica, GRANADO ESPADA actually has a very unique style of combat, making for an interesting twist on the genre. The game is very large, offering a plethora of zones to run through and explore. However, in GRANADO ESPADA, you actually recruit various characters throughout your journey to add to your party of NPCs. These NPCs are then capable of following you around the open world, aiding you in battle. This means that playing with other people isn't really a necessity, which I know kind of defeats the purpose of an MMO. Graphically though, it's still one of my favorite MMOs because it is set in a time period that I love. The player base has several thousand players playing each day still, split across both Europe and North America, so even though you can make an army of NPC party members, you really shouldn't be at a loss for people to play with. And that's it. We're done. This is the final free-to-play MMO list of 2019. These are games that I found highly enjoyable over the course of the year. These are games that are still alive and kicking right now. These are my selection of unique, but at the same time, worth playing MMOs. I know you can relate to some of these, and I know you probably disagree with most of them. That's fine, that's your opinion, and much like mine, we're entitled to having our own. Nevertheless, let's attempt to remain positive going into the new year, yeah? We got a lot to look forward to next year, and I'd love for us all to tackle it positively. If you feel that I missed a good free-to-play MMORPG though, do let me know which game that is and why you believe it's as good as you claim. I would love to take a deeper look at a variety of games I may have overlooked during 2020. But that's just my opinion, my impressions of the free-to-play MMO market. What do you guys think? What do you believe is the best free-to-play MMORPG? Are you excited for any currently? Will you try any of these out, or do you even want to? Let me know in the comments below and let's talk about it. Anyway guys, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. I'll see you all next time. Peace.